It started like so many things in my life with a girl. Her name was Chloe. We'd met a month before at a coffee shop on Magazine Street, a place with chipped paint and overpriced cold brew. She was an art student, which explained the faint smudge of charcoal on her wrist and the way she looked at everything. The street, her latte me, like she was mentally framing it, deciding on the composition. She had this hair, dark and thick, that fell around her shoulders in a way that made you want to push it back just to see the line of her neck. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was her laugh, low and a little surprised, like she wasn't expecting to find anything funny. We'd been on a few dates. Good ones, the kind that leave you checking your phone too often, hoping for a text. So when she suggested we go hear some jazz in the French Quarter, I didn't hesitate. It was a Tuesday, which felt right. The weekend crowds would be gone, leaving the real city underneath, the one that breathes when the tourists are asleep. There's this place, she'd said, leaning across the small table, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The neckline of her top dipped with emotion, and I caught a glimpse of a delicate silver chain against her skin. I forced my eyes back to hers. It's not on any of the maps. My professor told me about it. He said the music there does things. What kind of things? I asked, my voice coming out a bit rough. I took a sip of my water. She just smiled, a slow, secretive curve of her lips. You'll see. So that's how I found myself walking with her down Pirates Alley just after 10, the humid New Orleans air clinging to my shirt like a second skin. The sounds of Bourbon Street were a distant, brassy roar, but back here it was quiet. Just the scuff of our shoes on the old cobblestones and the drip of water from a wrought iron balcony above. The smell was a familiar cocktail of damp stone, blooming jasmine, and something older, something like rust and forgotten things. Chloe looked incredible. She was wearing a simple black dress that ended mid-thigh, and every time she took a step, the fabric pulled taut across her hips before relaxing again. Her legs were bare, and in the uneven light from the antique gas lamps, I could see the fine muscles in her calves tense and release as she navigated the uneven ground. She had on these strappy little sandals, and I found myself staring at the delicate bones of her ankles, at the way the thin leather straps bit gently into the skin of her instep. I had a sudden vivid image of tracing that line with my finger, and the heat that thought sent through me had nothing to do with the Louisiana night. It's just up here, she said, pointing to an unmarked, deep green door nestled between a bookstore and a gallery that was closed for the night. There was no sign, no bouncer, just a single, dimly lit bulb above the frame. It looked like a service entrance. Are you ready? For what, exactly? I asked, only half joking.
She just pushed the door open. The inside was a shock of fancha. From the quiet alley, we stepped into a low-ceilinged, intimate space that felt like stepping into a lawn. The air was thick with the smell of old whiskey, beeswax, and a sweet, smoky perfume I couldn't identify. It was dark, lit only by candles flickering in small glass jars on each small, round table and a single, muted spotlight on a small stage at the back. The walls were a deep, blood-red velvet, absorbing the sound, making everything feel close and hushed.
The place was maybe half full. People sat in couples or small groups, speaking in low murmurs, their faces painted in shifting shadows by the candlelight. No one looked up as we entered. A waiter, an older black man with a profoundly tired face and an impeccably white jacket, glided past and gestured wordlessly to a vacant table near the back, away from the stage. The chairs were deep and comfortable, upholstered in the same velvet as the walls. Chloe slid into hers, and the hem of her dress rode up a few inches, exposing more of her thigh. I looked away, my mouth dry, and focused on the stage. There was a trio setting up. An older man with a saxophone, his fingers long and gnarled like tree roots, checking the valves. A younger guy on a stand-up bass, tuning the strings with a series of soft, resonant thumps. And a woman at a piano, her back to us, her shoulders bare and pale above a simple black dress. Her hair was a shock of white, even from behind. The waiter appeared at our table. "What'll it be?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper, as if speaking any louder was forbidden. "Sazerac." I said that it felt like the right drink for the place. "And for the lady?" Chloe smiled up at him. "A view care, please." He nodded once and melted back into the darkness. "A view care?" I asked. When in Rome, she said, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. She leaned forward, and again my gaze was drawn to the hollow of her throat, to the way the candlelight caught the moisture on her lower lip. My professor said the cocktails here are part of the experience. Before I could ask what that meant, the lights on the stage brightened just a fraction. The pianist turned around. She was older than I'd thought, her face a web of fine lines, but her eyes were a startling, clear blue. She didn't smile. She simply placed her hands on the keys, and the saxophonist lifted his instrument to his lips. They began to play. That it wasn't a song I recognized. That it was slow, a mournful, meandering melody from the saxophone that the bassist underpinned with a deep, walking rhythm. The piano provided sparse, haunting chords that seemed to hang in the air long after the keys were released. That it was beautiful, but it was a beauty that felt surgical. Precise. That it didn't just fill the room. It seemed to dissect it. The low conversations around us died out completely. Everyone was transfixed. I felt Chloe's hand find mine under the table. Her skin was cool. That I laced my fingers through hers, feeling the small, precise bones. That I looked at her profile, at the way her long eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks. The music swelled slightly, the saxophone crying out a phrase that was full of a profound, aching loneliness. And then it happened. That a memory surfaced in my mind, not like a thought, but like a physical thing, rising up from some dark, locked cellar I'd forgotten existed. That I was 7 years old. That it was winter, and I was standing at my bedroom window watching my father's taillights disappear down our snowy street. That my parents had just had their final, screaming fight. That he'd thrown a suitcase into the back of his car and left. I remember the exact, desolate feeling that settled in my chest. The certainty that I was alone, the cold glass of the window against my forehead, the particular pattern the frost had made on the corners of the pane. That I hadn't thought of that moment in 20 years. That I had actively worked to forget it. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. That my grip on Chloe's hand tightened. She squeezed back, but she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, wide and unblinking. The music shifted. The piano took the lead, the notes becoming quicker, more intricate, almost frantic. The bass thumped a nervous, racing rhythm. Another memory, this one worse. That I was 15 at a party in Mikey Driscoll's basement. That I'd had too much to drink. Sarah Jennings was there, a girl I'd had a crush on for 2 years. She was crying in a corner because her boyfriend had dumped her. That I'd stumbled over, full of liquid courage, and tried to put my arm around her. That she'd shoved me away hard. "Don't touch me, you pathetic loser," she'd slurred, her face contorted with disgust. "Everyone knows you just stare at me. It's creepy." The laughter from the guys standing nearby. The hot, shameful flush that had consumed my entire body. That I'd thrown up in the bushes outside and walked home alone in the rain. That I was breathing heavily now. This was insane. What was this music? It was pulling things out of me, things I was deeply ashamed of, things I'd buried. I looked around the room. Other people were reacting too. That a man at a nearby table had his head in his hands. That a woman was silently crying, tears cutting clean tracks through her makeup. Chloe was perfectly still. That a single tear traced a path from the corner of her eye down to her jawline, but her expression was one of rapt fascination, not pain. The song reached its conclusion, the notes from the saxophone fading into a whisper before disappearing entirely. There was a moment of absolute, stunned silence. Then a smattering of applause, hesitant, almost reluctant. The spell was broken. That I let go of Chloe's hand and wiped my own on my jeans. They were damp with sweat. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were shining, but not with tears, with excitement. "I told you," she said, her voice breathless. It knows things." Our drinks arrived. The waiter set them down without a word and vanished. That I grabbed my Sazerac and took a long swallow. The strong whiskey and herbs burned a clean path down my throat, grounding me. That wasn't just knowing things, Chloe, that was invasive. I felt raw, exposed, as if someone had peeled back my skull and rummaged around in my most private thoughts. "It's just music," she said, but she was smiling that secret smile again. She took a sip of her cocktail. "It's art that it's supposed to make you feel." Before I could argue, the music started again. This time it was a different tune, lighter, more upbeat, a classic Dixieland number. The mood in the room lifted instantly. People began to talk again, their laughter sounding a little too loud, too relieved. The previous moment was being collectively dismissed, packed away like a bad dream. I tried to relax that I focused on Chloe. On the way she tapped her finger on the table in time with the music. On the smooth skin of her exposed shoulder. I let my gaze travel down her arm to her hand, to the way she held her glass. I was trying to anchor myself in the present, in her physicality, to push away the unease coiling in my gut. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting alone at a small table in the darkest corner of the room, so deep in shadow that he was almost a part of the wall. I hadn't seen him when we came in. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking directly at me. He was an unremarkable looking man. Pale. Thin-faced. He might have been 40, he might have been 60, it was hard to tell in the dim light. His hair was a nondescript brown, thinning on top. He wore a plain, dark suit that looked a size too big for him. There was nothing outwardly threatening about him, but the intensity of his gaze was like a physical weight. He wasn't just glancing around the room, his entire focus was on me. His eyes were dark pits, and they held mine with a terrifying stillness. I looked away, a shiver going through me. I took another drink, trying to play it cool. Don't be paranoid. I told myself. He's just zoning out. You're in his line of sight. I waited a full minute, focusing on the band on Chloe's leg, which was now pressed against mine under the table. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure want that momentarily overrode my fear. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the fabric of my jeans. I let my hand fall to my thigh, my pinky finger just brushing the bare skin of her leg. She didn't pull away. A flush of heat went through me. Slowly, casually, I let my eyes drift back to the corner. He was still watching. Unblinking, his head hadn't moved, his hands were folded on the table in front of him, perfectly still. He looked like a mannequin. A wax figure. Everything about him was wrong. The lack of movement was unnatural. People fidget, they blink, they take a drink, they look at the band. He did none of those things. He was a statue with living, watching eyes. What is it? Chloe asked, noticing my tension. That guy in the corner, I said, keeping my voice low. Is he staring at us? She followed my gaze. She frowned, squinting into the darkness. What guy? I looked back. He was still there, plain as day, right there. I in the corner, the pale guy in the dark suit. She shook her head, a small line of confusion appearing between her eyebrows. There's no one there, Mark. It's just an empty table and a shadow. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I looked again. He was there. I could see him clearly. The way the faint light glinted off the bridge of his nose, the stark white of his collar against his pale neck. No, he's right there, I insisted, an edge of desperation in my voice. Look. But when Chloe looked again, she just shook her head. I don't see anyone. Maybe you're still spooked from the music. She gave me a playful nudge with her knee, her thigh was firm against mine. The sensation was incredibly distracting, a flare of desire in the middle of my growing dread. I didn't press it. I forced a smile. Yeah, must be. But I knew what I saw. For the rest of the set, I kept my eyes locked on the stage, on my drink, on Chloe. I didn't let myself look back at that corner. I could feel his gaze on the side of my face, a constant, prickling pressure. Every hair on my arm was standing up. The set ended. The applause was more genuine this time. The spell of the first song was broken, and people were back to enjoying a night out. The band took a bow and left the stage. I'm going to run to the ladies' room, Chloe said, standing up. The movement made her dress sway. She leaned over to grab her small purse from the floor, and the neckline gaped open. I had a perfect heart-stopping view of the smooth curve of her breast. The lace edge of a black bra.my breath caught in my throat. She straightened up, completely unaware of the effect she just had on me, and smiled. Order me another one of these? It's delicious. I just nodded, my mouth unable to form words. I watched her walk away, the hypnotic sway of her hips, the confident click of her sandals on the wooden floor. She disappeared down a dark hallway marked by a small lit sign. The moment she was gone, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a physical pressure, a cold spot on my skin. I couldn't help it. I had to know. I turned my head and looked at the corner table. It was empty, the chair was pushed in, there was no glass, no indication that anyone had been there at all. A wave of relief, so strong it felt like nausea, washed over me. I'd imagined it. Chloe was right. The music, the atmosphere, my own stupid, overactive imagination that I let out a shaky breath and signaled the waiter for another round. I was still facing the corner, feeling like an idiot, when a voice spoke directly behind me, so close I could feel the faint disturbance of air on my ear. A poignant memory, the first great fracture. I jerked around in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. That it was him, that he was standing right behind my chair, that I hadn't heard him approach, that he smelled faintly of dust and dry paper. His face was expressionless, his dark eyes fixed on me. Up close, I could see the pores on his nose, the faint, bloodless line of his lips. What? I managed to choke out. The boy at the window, he said, his voice a dry, soft rustle like pages turning. Watching his world drive away. You still stand at windows, don't you? Waiting for them to come back. Ice flooded my veins. That he was talking about my memory. The one the music had pulled out of me. The one I had never, ever told anyone about. Who are you? I demanded, my voice trembling. How do you know that? He didn't answer. His eyes drifted past me toward the hallway where Chloe had disappeared. That a subtle change came over his face. That it wasn't a smile, but something in the set of his mouth tightened, a flicker of interest? Appraisal? It was deeply unsettling. The body is a fascinating ledger, he murmured, his voice barely audible. It inscribes every secret upon itself, the slope of a shoulder, the tension in a thigh. It all tells a story. A story of want. He was talking about Chloe. That he was reducing her to parts, to a thing to be read. A hot, protective anger surged through me, mixing with the terror. Get away from me, I snarled. That he finally looked back at me. His gaze was empty, devoid of any human emotion. The music doesn't take, he whispered. It simply reveals what is already playing very quietly inside. Most people spend their lives trying to drown it out. Here they are forced to listen. He took a half step closer. I recoiled, pushing my chair back. The wood screeched against the floor. A few people at nearby tables glanced over. Your song is particularly layered, he said.